Hello, golfers, and welcome to this week's podcast. This week, we're going to be talking about practicing with a purpose, and in particular, the fundamental differences between blocked and random practice. So, let's get straight into it and talk about our definitions. On the one hand, we've got block practice, and this is where we repeat the same skill over and over. An example of this would be going to the range with your 7-iron and hitting 30 balls to the same target off the same lie. On the other hand, we've got the random practice, or as I like to call the quality practice, where we're hitting different shots with different clubs to different targets using a variety of ball flights off different lies. Now, both practices have their place and play a role in allowing you and helping you to get better at the game of golf. But before we go into the pros and cons of each form of practice, let's just talk about a principle that I'm sure many of you have heard about, the 10,000 hour rule. And for many, many years now, we've been told or led to believe that if you put in your 10,000 hours, you're going to become a master at the game of golf or a master at the skill. But this principle is often misunderstood and misquoted, because just because you're putting in your 10,000 hours does not necessarily mean you're going to master the game of golf. What it may lead to is mastering a specific skill in this multi-skilled sport. So going down to the range and hitting ball after ball with your 7-iron off a flat lie to the orange pole may mean you may master that particular skill, but you still have a long way to go in mastering the other skills that make up this game, from driving to pitching, chipping, putting, wind play, etc., etc. So just bear that in mind when you go to the range, so that we don't get stuck into a routine of doing the same thing over and over. So block practice and random practice have pros and cons, and I'd like to spend some time going through that quickly. So on the block side, we've got the pros, which is, first thing is that it's a great way for you to learn something new. So let's say, for an example, that you're a golfer that's really battled with a slice for a long period of time. You then go and see a coach, and that coach teaches you how to hit a draw, or how to exaggerate the feeling to help you create a draw shape. Block practice is a great way to learn this new skill. It's also a great way to create understanding and belief. And when we have belief in a specific thing that we're doing, we inspire confidence in ourselves, which makes us feel that we're playing better golf, which is obviously very important. And lastly, and this is a big one for me, whenever you're going into making big swing changes or changing faults in your swing, block practice is the ideal way of making those changes stick and for you to learn that new feeling. However, the cons of block practice is that we get this feeling of we have it with a certain club, but then we lose it with another. And often I see people at the driving range stand there hitting 7-iron after 7-iron, and by the time they get to ball 20 or 25, they're really hitting the ball well. But then they change to a different club or change to a different target, they lose that feeling, and all of a sudden they don't hit the ball as well as they did with the 7-iron. Another con of block practice is that it raises expectations and makes us believe that we're hitting it so good on the range, and there's no ways that we're going to hit it badly on the golf course. And often that is definitely not the case, and we often hear players saying, I'm hitting it so good on the range, but I just can't take it to the course. And that's a clear sign that the blocked practice is preventing them from taking that good feeling onto the golf course. On the other side, we've got random practice, and like I said earlier, this is where we're hitting different shots to different targets with different clubs. So a big pro for this is it's real world practice. This is exactly what happens on the golf course. We hit a driver, followed by a wedge, then a chip, then a 7-iron on a par 3. So we're constantly changing the shots, constantly changing our targets, and in most cases, constantly changing our lie conditions. No shot is ever the same. It's also more difficult and requires more discipline. And because of this, it's a far more effective way of learning. Because we're having to move the ball around in terms of shaping it, change the way we're aiming, we're constantly having to draw back on information that's stored in our brain of things that we had done in an earlier practice session. So it's a great way to learn. However, the cons of random practice is that when we don't do it very well, we don't hit the shots on demand, our confidence levels are low when we're not hitting it great. Another thing is it's not good for swing changes. So when you're working with a coach and you're making changes to your swing, random practice is not necessarily the best way of ingraining those new feelings. So having said all of that, when do we practice blocked and when do we practice random? So when you head down to the range, bear these in mind. When you are learning a new skill, exaggerating a new feeling, or making swing changes, blocked practice is ideal for that form of training. You can also use block practice when you have no immediate pressure, no tournaments, no big matches coming up, so you don't have to worry about taking those feelings into a real world situation. On the other side, random practice is ideal when we're trying to get better at the game or trying to lower our handicap, because it's real world practice. We're practicing what we would like to do on the golf course, on the driving range, hitting to the left, hitting to the right, drawing, fading, hitting the ball high, hitting the ball low, hitting a driver followed by a wedge shot, etc. Random practice is fantastic for warming up. And this is probably the most important thing from this podcast this week, is that so often I see people coming down just before the Wednesday game and hitting their bucket of balls and hitting ball after ball with the same club. Random practice is ideal for warming up. Hit a driver, then hit a wedge, then hit an iron, and follow a non-specific pattern on the practice range. And obviously this is the form of practice you should be practicing before tournaments or big matches. So I hope I've given you a nice bit of food for thought, and I'd like you guys to take what I've had to say and put it into practice on the driving range. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend on the golf course, and we'll catch up with you next week.